Miss Owens. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to The Right to Live, a social and political justice forum. Today, we will be discussing a very important and timely topic, which is peaceful interactions with the law enforcement. We want to know the best practices. We want to know what are the things we should do. We want to know how do we equip ourselves, empower ourselves in this day and age as we interact with not only law enforcement, but also with people who are racist, who are discriminative, and people who just do not believe in the power of togetherness. So we're going to open our program with Attorney Julian Miller with our greeting and welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Glennie. To Madam President, our administration, faculty, staff, students, and our distinguished panelists, it is my honor to welcome you to this Right to Live Forum on Social and Political Justice. Most importantly, this would be the inaugural forum for the newly established Ruben V. Anderson Institute for Social Justice that was established to address issues of criminal justice equity, public health equity, educational equity, and economic justice. Justice Tougaloo answered the beck and call during the civil rights movement in the 1960s and served as a haven for leaders of the civil rights movement to advance both racial and economic equity and social justice. Today in the 21st century, Tougaloo once again answers that call to address those same issues that are still as prevalent today. The same issues that we faced in the civil rights movement of racial injustice and economic equity, again, are still prevalent today, and we are excited with this forum to address a specific issue around criminal justice equity and related to issues of police brutality, as well as inequities and racial inequities in the criminal justice system. So we ask you to, as you hear these distinguished panelists discuss their experiences and discuss not only the problem, the nature of the problem, but also solutions to that problem, I want you to begin to think about what you can do in your own right. For the Anderson Institute, and I hope Attorney Lumumba speaks about this, the Anderson Institute is looking to do a potential project called Born to Lead that was the brainchild of Justice Anderson that looks to address providing services around education and job training and placement, career placement, and community service for those who are formerly incarcerated. And so as we begin in that same mindset, we ask you again to think about what you can do to improve our community as we're desiring here to do at Tougaloo, to not only advance racial and economic justice and equity in our communities, but also across the country and around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for their warm welcome, Attorney Miller. Next, we will have an invocation by our lovely chaplain, Chaplain Maxine Bolden.
Good afternoon. Let's pray together. Couldn't hear nobody pray. Couldn't hear nobody pray. Way down yonder by myself. Couldn't hear nobody pray. God, in these times of challenge and change and uncertainty and anxiety, we come, God, believing that there is hope and that there is a word from the Lord. And so as we come to you, God, the God of justice and mercy and grace, we gather this afternoon to see, to hear, to know, and to understand. How do you hear the things that are happening, God, like Habakkuk, and you do not move, you do not answer? We thank you, God, that as we listen for your voice, that we not only hear the cries of victims, but God, we hear the cry of the voice of wisdom from those, God, who stand in the gap, those who place themselves in danger day after day, those who are the just and the righteous. And we pray that you will give us ears to hear the day, eyes to see, and minds and hearts to perceive that you are present with us and that your voice is speaking. Speak, Lord, for your servants are listening. Speak through those men and women who will come this afternoon. Help us to hear and to know that there is a word from the Lord, and it is justice. This is one voice praying for all of our hearts and minds together. In Jesus' name, let it be so. Amen.
Thank you so much, Chaplain Bolden, for that lovely prayer. Welcome again, everyone, to our The Right to Live program of Social Justice and Political Justice Forum. My name is Dr. Christina Gladney. I serve as a research associate in the Office of Sponsored Programs and Research here at Tougaloo College. I am so excited to introduce our newly installed SGA Student Government Association President, Mr. Amon J. Haynes of the real administration.
Thank you, Dr. Gladney. Good afternoon. The purpose of this forum is to provide knowledge, education, and insight related to the best practices surrounding interactions with law enforcement, while also offering actions that can be taken to address the current issues related to social and political justice we continue to see in our communities today. The topics we discuss today will cover many common experiences that happen every day among our students, faculty, and staff. We're asking our panelists to provide their professional expertise and guidance related to the actions that should and should not be taken during interactions with law enforcement. From traffic stops to home encounters, it is important to know the best ways to navigate these interactions that will prevent negative and even deadly consequences. We understand that knowledge is power and education is key. This forum is designed to deliver both. This program is also designed to offer solutions and strategies that students and our greater audience can adopt and move forward in hopes of a better and more just social and criminal justice system. As we all know, Tougaloo College is where history meets the future. Today, we will be provided with a glimpse of the historical aspect of law enforcement and how it affects us today. Thank you for coming to The Right to Live, a social and political justice forum.
Awesome job, Amon. Thank you so much for delivering that purpose. It really set the tone for today. Next, we will be introducing our lovely panelists, our awesome panelists, and we so appreciate them for coming and being a part of this program. I will first begin with our first panelist, District Attorney Jody Owens. Jody E. Owens II is the District Attorney of the 7th Circuit Court District, wherein he is responsible for prosecuting the largest criminal docket in the state of Mississippi that includes all violent offenses such as capital murder, arson, child molestation, jail-related issues, officer-involved fatalities. Jody maintains his eagerness to bring about real criminal justice reform by implementing and investigating matters that others in his capacity have refused and continue to refuse to touch for far too long, by addressing complaints of the court and community by presenting undisputable facts. In his previous work, Jody served as the Chief Policy Counsel and Managing Attorney of the Southern Poverty Law Center, Mississippi office, where he supervised efforts to reform the state's juvenile justice, educational, and mental health systems. Jody has successfully litigated class action lawsuits on behalf of children and adults throughout the Deep South in matters concerning mass incarceration, private prisons, and ending the school-to-prison pipeline. Jody's work brought to light horrific and unconstitutional conditions of confinement forced upon children and youth in many for-profit and public juvenile detention facilities. As a lieutenant in the United States Navy Reserves, Jody continues his work defined by the same notions of fairness, public safety, service, and critical thought, which have been consistent throughout his life. Jody is a national presenter and teacher on criminal justice reform who started his legal career as an attorney with the Butler Snow Law Firm. Jody is a recipient of the Presidential Award for Distinguished Contributions to Justice from the American Society of Criminology. He was named the top 40 under 40 by the National Bar Association and is a recipient of the Gusty Advocate for Youth Award by the National Juvenile Justice Network. Jody is the graduate of Jackson State University and received his Juris Doctorate from Howard University School of Law. Let's welcome Mr. Jody Owens. Awesome. Next, we have attorney Jarvis Dortch. Jarvis is a native of Jackson, Mississippi, and married to the former Mrs. Stephanie Robinson of Terry, Mississippi. He is a graduate of Terry High School and received his bachelor's degree in political science from the Jackson State University. Jarvis also earned a Juris Doctorate from Mississippi College School of Law and is admitted to the Mississippi State Bar. Jarvis was elected to the Mississippi Legislature in 2015 and serves in the Mississippi House representing House District 66. District 66 is made up of neighborhoods in South Jackson, Byram, Terry, Raymond, and Utica. In the 2019 election cycle, Jarvis was unopposed and returned to the House for a second term. Prior to being elected to the Mississippi House, Jarvis served as program manager and staff attorney at the Mississippi Health Advocacy Program, where he provided consumer assistance and appeals to healthcare consumers. He has worked for over a decade in various arenas of public health and social justice advocacy with both nonprofit organizations and state agencies in Mississippi. In July 2020, Jarvis stepped down from the legislature to become the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Mississippi. Let's welcome Mr. Attorney Jarvis Dortch. Next, we have Sheriff Rolando Fair. Sheriff Fair was elected Sheriff of Grenada County in 2019. He served over 24 years in law enforcement as a Mississippi Highway Patrolman, in which he has retired. He is certified in executive protection and basic EMT, as well as a MBLI, Mississippi Black Leadership Institute alumni. He has started various organizations from Operation Jumpstart, and he's participated in Leadership Grenada. He is a part of the Rotary Club, the Lions Club, the Exchange Club. He is a member of the 100 Black Men of Grenada, Burning Bush Missionary Baptist Church, and a graduate of Rare High School class of 1988. Let's welcome Sheriff Rolando Fair. And he's the sheriff of my hometown, so I'm excited to welcome him to Tougaloo. Next, coming from the beautiful land of the Delta, we have Chief Sandra Williams. Chief Sandra Johnson Williams was appointed Chief of Police in Clarksdale, Mississippi on September the 11th, 2017. She is the first woman to ever hold this position. Williams is an accomplished and highly dedicated law enforcement officer with over 29 years of experience. She began her career with the Vicksburg Police Department in July 1999. Throughout her career at the Vicksburg Vicksburg Police Department. She served in numerous divisions and positions, including patrol, school resource officer, crime prevention officer, juvenile investigator, public information officer, and a criminal investigator. Chief Williams is also certified as a criminal investigator, gang resistance education and training officer, and as a computer voice stress analyst. As she climbed through the ranks, she was promoted to captain in 2013 and appointed to command the Criminal Investigative Division. Chief Williams was the first female captain in the history of the police department and the only female to command at the Vicksburg Police Department. Prior to her appointment with the Clarksdale Police Department, Chief Williams commanded the Criminal Investigative Division for over 4 years, where she was responsible for overseeing complex criminal investigations relating to major crimes, narcotics, crime scenes, and juvenile investigations. Chief Williams is a graduate of the Jackson State University with a BA degree in criminal justice and correctional services. She is currently an active reservist and has honorably served over 19 years in the United States Navy Reserve. Awesome. She is assigned to a Defense Intelligence Unit located in Millington, Tennessee. Chief Williams is passionate in her role as a public servant. She understands and appreciates the importance of transparency, fairness, and respectful community engagement. Let's welcome Chief Sandra Williams. Last but certainly not least, we have our own Tougaloo alumni, attorney Rukia Lumumba. A legal professional, transformative justice strategist, and daughter of the late Mayor Chokwe Lumumba and Nubia Lumumba, is executive director of the People's Advocate Institute, co-director of the Electoral Justice Project of the Movement for Black Lives, and campaign manager of the committee to elect Chokwe Antar Lumumba for mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. Lumumba works at the intersections of criminal and electoral justice, defending the human rights of those behind prison walls, engaging communities in community-led governance efforts, people's assemblies, alternatives to incarceration initiatives, and an intentional grassroots process for cultivating ideals and developing solutions to crime, punitive legal systems, and social injustice facing far too many communities. Her work is centered on the belief that community agency is what architects robust systems change and is what is needed to build new institutional power that paves the way for a more just system rooted in restoration, resilience, and self-determination. Let's welcome Attorney Lumumba. So, now that all of our guests have been welcomed and properly introduced, it is time for our question and answer section. Are you ready? Okay. So this is directly from our own Tougaloo alumni dissertation. A Tougaloo College civil rights scholar wrote this: "Stay woke has been a resounding mantra for 21st century civil rights activists and advocates. However, being awake is not a foreign concept to those who were actively involved in and supporters of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 encouraged Americans not to sleep during great moments of social change, Before him, a highly respected Mississippi civil rights leader, Reverend R.L.T. Smith, urged Mississippi voters to wake up. In preparation for the June 1962 Democratic primary to solidify his bid for the 3rd congressional seat for the U.S. House of Representatives, Reverend Smith distributed a list of problems that affected African Americans in Jackson, Mississippi. Number 1, denial of human dignity. Number 2, denial of the ballot. Number 3, biased job opportunities. Number 4, unequal justice in courts. Number 5, police brutality. Number 6, physical intimidation. Number 7, economic pressure. Number 8, inadequate educational opportunities. And number 9, lack of initiatives in seeking our rights. At that time, these same problems were not only affecting Blacks in the city of Jackson, they affected the Black populace in the entire state of Mississippi. Almost 60 years later, these issues, as we know, still persist. This forum was named The Right to Live because we all should have that right. Today, we want to know from our panelists, how do we stand in that right as we encounter law enforcement? Understanding the historical context that is around law enforcement, race, and class, how has the history of policing influenced the current issues seen among race and class related to social justice today? And we ask that you all take no more than 3 minutes in your response. Yes, I can. So, how has the history of policing influenced the current issues seen among race and class related to social justice today? You may start if you would like to start.
Well, good afternoon. When we look at the context of the historical component of policing, we have to always look at the data of what police looks like today, what it looks like nationally, and what it looks like in Mississippi. We know that policing has an end result, and the end result is individuals, whether our society is safer or who is arrested and ultimately incarcerated. We know that the problem of mass incarceration in this country is a predominant problem that reflects people of color, brown and Black. What I find most fascinating about the question is that while we have more Black police chiefs and more Black sheriffs, policing still looks very similar as it always did 60 years ago. Historically, people of color were concerned about police. There was a time frame where Blacks were not in leadership. There was a time frame where police could get away with anything because they were police. There were no camera phones. There were no videos. There were not the things we see right now that really has dictated how we hold police more accountable. There's always been a need for good policing. But when we expose bad police, we see the impact that they can have on society. Now, I know the chief of Clarksdale. I've known her for about a decade. I know she's fantastic. I've heard great things about retiree up here. But there still is an issue with police when we look at what has sparked protests throughout this country right now, which is that police are not held accountable for a bunch of reasons. And I can speak to you about that from a prosecutor standpoint. When police do something wrong that's under the color of law, two things can happen. Either they can be prosecuted by your local district attorney, or that investigation can be turned over to the federal authorities for an investigation. And when I was sworn in January, I inherited about 5 police brutality cases. And those cases had been unindicted for more than a year in our office. And I couldn't understand why, because I would think if someone does something wrong, they have to be held accountable. What I've learned is that there's a certain code amongst people that most police don't look to do anything wrong, but bad things can happen. Today we ask police to be the protectors, mental health counselors, providers, AMRs, almost everything in society. And we give them unfettered authority with weapons. They have a license to kill if an individual presents a harm to themselves or others. And they're the only people in society that has that authority. I mean, it's actually more powerful than that of a prosecutor. And in addition, they bring cases to prosecutors to indict. So they get a case before I even touch a case. So what they say and what they do and their integrity matters. So when I think about the historical context of policing, I think policing has gotten better and more accountable because people understand the science of policing and they're trying to look at things like adolescent brain behavior and mental health illnesses and all those things that make tragic results when we don't account for those things. But we still have very much, Doctor, a long way to go when we look at what our jails and our prisons look like and making sure not just that pressure is put on police, but the larger system of prosecutors, of defenders, of the mental health system, all are giving them the support so we don't find the policing to be something that we view negatively, but something we view positively.
Thank you. Attorney Lumumba.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. And I think that that DA Owens really answered it well. You know, one thing I will say before I get into the question is, because I feel like it's a little competition because so many Jackson State people up here. You know, like just to shout out, because I gave a short bio, so I too went to Howard Law School, and I was Miss Tougaloo.
Oh,
so I want to throw some like goodness out here for all us Tougalooans this week, and a whole bunch of other things that I didn't include that were in my in bio, and some of that is directly related to this. Because for over 18 years, this is the work that I've really centered in terms of when we talk about transformative justice. It's actually about looking at how do we shift systems to actually respond in a direct way to the needs of people so that we don't have to have police respond to incidents of violence because they don't exist, right? And so when we're talking about the problem with policing, I think that we're also talking about a problem overall with a system in this country, an overall system, a criminal justice system, but it expands beyond that, to a healthcare system, to an education system, to a system that really is founded around an idea of money and capital, as opposed to an idea of resourcing our people with what they need. And so if we look at, you know, the modern day policing movement, you know, I am a leader in the movement for Black Lives. We have put out, you know, nationally a huge campaign called Defund the Police, right? Defunding the police is not about eradicating all forms of safety. It's about looking at how do we really begin to look at what the job of police are and what the job of other entities and services are. And so it's really about where is the mental health services? Where are the health and education services? Why are police officers, as Jody has indicated, as DA Owens has indicated, why are they the ones responding to mental health crises? What skills do they have, you know, in order to do that? Where are the resources for, you know, housing? Many of the people that we see in Jackson are living homeless and across the state of Mississippi, but I'm going to talk about Jackson. Homeless and without housing, struggling with drug addiction, right? Not drug use, but addiction in a very hard and real way. Many of the things that we see are people getting picked up for crimes of poverty, right? We see a lot of crimes of poverty across the state, and especially in Jackson, where we see people sitting in jails and in prisons because they can't afford bail, and in prison because they have made a mistake around trying to protect their life, or in terms of food security, in terms of housing security, or in some other way because of an intracommunal problem. And that intracommunal problem is also, and I'm going to be quiet after this, is something that we don't really talk about. We often hear on the news, we hear story after story after story of people talking about someone who got shot and how that's such a high crime. You know, we have high crime in Jackson. You know, just the other day, we heard of 2 young people that shot each other. We heard of 2 elders that shot each other. When we look at the numbers of shootings and that rise in shootings in Jackson and other places in the country, because it has literally increased everywhere in the country during COVID, what we see is that this is not just an instance of crime. This is actually an instance of people with personal issues not knowing how to resolve those issues without easily pulling out a gun. And that is what we're talking about. So it's violence. And I think there's a real difference between violence and crime. And what we see is that when we recognize the real issue, when we see that our issues are because two neighbors are arguing because one neighbor literally maybe have knocked a limb from their tree, or the leaves keep falling in their yard, and so they end up getting into an argument and end up shooting each other, right? We see that's not crime, that's violence. And how is that mediated? That's mediated by other community members. That's mediated by other services that can be provided. When we have two young people that don't know how to resolve an issue and resort to gun violence, that's a lack of proper resources in our communities that's giving them alternatives, where they're not in a space where they can sit there and argue over something that leads to something like gun violence. So I think, we have to really dig deeper into the problem, because if we look at the problem, we find that the solution is not increasing policing. That's the solution is actually around increasing the resources in our community that actually prevent violence and crime from happening in the first place. So then our police system doesn't have to be the ones responding and being the solution to everything, but instead can be the solution to the thing that it needs to do, which is finding out when real murders and cases of harm happen, detection, and all of that good work that we know needs to happen in order to have a just system. So.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. So understanding the historical context is important. Understanding that the fact that the law enforcement has been used historically to divide races by class. And so knowing this, knowing that these measures have been historically in place and are still in place, what are some of the steps or actions your specific area of law enforcement or social justice have taken to address these negative historical influences within policing? And we ask that you please take 3 minutes. I'm going to put a little finger up when you have 1 minute to just keep the program timely. Okay, so I would love to hear from some of our other panelists at this time. Chief Williams, our Sheriff Fair, or even Mr. Dortch, if you all want to come in as well. But we would like to know how you're actually understanding the context the historical context and incorporating that as it relates to your specific area of law enforcement.
Definitely, I'll answer the question, and thank you for that question. I have been in Clarksville, Mississippi now for just a little bit over 3 years. And I came from Vicksburg, so the makeup of the people is slightly different than where I came from. There's probably 85% African Americans in the city of Clarksdale, with a population of about 17,000 people. And what I have seen and what I have noticed and what I have tried to do since I have been there, first of all, understand why we're constantly having to respond to certain types of calls. And one of the problems that I see in our community, and it's just as was said, that one of the problems is the lack of knowledge of knowing how to resolve conflicts effectively. Mm-hmm. And typically what I am seeing, people are resolving conflicts by violence, or they're constantly coming to a police department to file charges on family members, to file charges on loved ones. And of course, that creates a database of outstanding warrants at all times. And right now we're looking at a situation where we have hundreds of warrants that are on file. And every time you file charges against someone, then that's giving law enforcement the legal opportunity to come and approach someone. And a lot of times, as we know, through this nation, sometimes we have good results, and unfortunately, sometimes we have bad results. And so first of all, I would say that in dealing with the community, we need to somehow teach people how to resolve conflicts peacefully from a law enforcement perspective. And I constantly teach this, Training, training, training. It is so very important to teach our officers how to deal with and how to interact with people in the community. And first of all, even though you may have a preconceived notion about someone, it is important to treat people with respect and be professional at all times.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Chief Williams. Did you have anything to add, Sheriff Fair?
Yes, I do. Thank you. One of the characteristics that I try to have the officers follow is mine. When you have a great relationship with the community, you can only move in the right direction. I have been enforcing community policing neighborhood checks. This is intended to prevent crime before it happens rather than responding after it occurs. Focuses on creating a safe social environment as well. It engages the residents to determine which criminal activities that they are most affected by, creating an accurate law enforcement priority list. It encourages residents to participate with law enforcement. The benefits of these moves and changes, residents have a more favorable view of their local law enforcement. Improved trust between law enforcement and residents. More accurate information from residents on criminal activities. Better understanding of the needs of citizens and their expectations of the police. When you involve yourself within your community and you have your officers to involve themselves as well, you will get a better understanding of people's wants and needs and their actions. But if you go to a situation and you're heated, you're worse off than the situation you went to. You have to have a calm mind and relax and just think outside the box. Every situation you go to doesn't mean that somebody has to go to jail. Most of the time, just talking to the two different individuals will resolve the problem. But the most important step you have to take is all law enforcement has to respect the citizens, no matter how bad they are, what they did, how they talk. You got to give them respect in order to get respect.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheriff Fair. And I can give a witness to Sheriff Fair and his involvement in the communities within Grenada. I actually met Sheriff Fair at a podcast taping of some young men in the community who's trying to just give a voice to the youth and to millennials. And I met Sheriff Fair when he was running for his sheriff candidacy in the race. And I was very impressed that he was just in the atmosphere with millennials who were challenging him, asking him those tough questions. And he was able to articulate great responses. And he had a landmark win in Grenada. How many years was the sheriff in place?
24.
24 years that the previous sheriff, his predecessor, was in place before he won the election. And so that type of community work is what won him that election. I called down to Grenada and said, Papa, Mama, y'all got to vote for this man because he's good and he understands us and he wants to understand us. So I did want to put that plug in for you because I can give a living witness that he does involve himself very well in our communities. So some of you all have touched on this a little bit already as it relates to your personal philosophy in law enforcement. We don't want this forum to be an adversarial forum or a, butting heads. We want this to be a coming together. And so a lot of times when we put law enforcement in the same room with community people or advocates of the community, it becomes heated. And we don't want it to become heated because we understand that you're a part of us. You're a part of our community just as much as we're a part of yours. And so to set the tone for conversations, because they're going to get a little, particular. So to set the tone, I wanted to know from our law enforcement officers, what are your personal philosophies as it relates to how you go about being in law enforcement? Has it changed over time from your early novice years to now? Have the times changed in any ways that you're able to speak on that have prompted you to have to alter how you approach things? But we would love to hear from you all as law enforcement officers, of your personal philosophies as it relates to interactions and just doing your duties as police.
Okay, definitely. My personal philosophy is that every citizen in the community deserves the extent of the law. Every citizen deserve to be served and protected personally as well as their property. And in order to do that, I always have to go back to training. I'm sorry, let me take my mask off. Didn't realize I had it on. You have to go back to training and teaching the officers how to interact with the people in the community. Community policing is a big proponent in the city of Clarksdale. It's a small community. There's a lot of officers that have been there for a number of years. It is so very important to build those bridges with the people in the community, get to know the people in the community, and there could possibly be situations where you can stop a terrible event from happening before it actually happens.
Thank you. Sheriff Fair?
Well, mine is pretty much a twofold for number 3 and 4. Ethics, moral development is one of the strong points where I like to push for the officers. Social learning, how to perform on the job, recognize the organization, norms, values, and cultures, which leads to vicarious learning. Competence. Most officers model behaviors after experienced officers, whether good or bad. Status, mainly among an informal group of peers who shape their behavior as well. Power, and this is the big one. A lot of officers love power. They feed off of it, and it sometimes derails their objective. Law enforcement must create a culture of ethics within their agency. One of them is selfishness. That's one of the topics where each officer needs to have at his disposal. Integrity, perception, enthusiasm, mentoring, which is a big thing that I did from the time I've been in Grenada County, mentoring the young, because I always felt that a lot of them are from broken homes, a lot of issues, and as they grow older, if they feel of you as a friend, they will come to you, they will talk to you. The funniest thing that ever happened was I used to play a lot of basketball in the gym, and gang members used to play basketball with me as well. Different gangs, but they would play on each end of the court. The thing they learned about me, I still respected them as people. But at the same time, they know when they ran across me on the highways and byways, I was going to do my job. So they did respect me, and they still do to this day. You had to have a good team of officers. You had to have a good team of officers to address daily. You need to understand the basic needs of the officer. You need to understand their stress levels. Sometimes an officer just needs a day off because he's going through the day-to-day life of family, stress, praise, and recognition. You have to praise and recognize your officers for good things they do, and at the same time punish them for things that's not by the book. Self-motivation, attitude, health and fitness is a big one as well.
Thank you, Sheriff Fair. Okay, so now that we've set the tone and understand that the philosophies of our law enforcement officers on the panel, we want to dive into the real. So now looking at traffic stops. The most common interactions with law enforcement are traffic stops. What are your recommendations to civilians when pulled over by law enforcement? What are the best actions to ensure that no bad or negative confrontation takes place? And what actions should be avoided during an encounter with law enforcement during a traffic stop? So first, I want us to talk about what are your recommendations to civilians when pulled over by the law enforcement? So if you can take us, either all can take us through best practices, step by step, of what should we do when we get pulled over by law enforcement.
Definitely. And I have to say that I am a citizen on the street driving when I leave my hometown. And personally, when I'm out there, I am constantly aware of my speed. I am aware of the rules and of the road. You've got to, first of all, be aware of the rules of the road. And I am looking for the police as well, even though I am the police. And there have been times that I have been stopped by the police. And I think that we all should do pretty much the same thing when stopped by the police. You stop when you are signaled to stop by the police. Have your driver's license, your insurance, the documents prepared to give to the officer once the officer requests those documents. You should sit there with your hands on the steering wheel. I personally let my windows down so there is a clear view inside of my vehicle. Your hands are on the steering wheel, and you wait until you are approached by the officer. At no time during this moment, if you drop something on the floorboard of the car, leave it on the floorboard of the car. Do not dig through your console looking for things. If you happen to not have your license, registration, insurance by the time the officer waits to the car, then you should have that conversation with that officer. Officer, I have not had the opportunity to get my license, my registration, my insurance is in my console. All the while, you're still sitting there with your hands on the steering wheel. You should look an officer face to face. You should answer his questions as he asks you questions. And most importantly, always comply with the instructions that the officer gives you.
Thank you, Chief Williams. Do I have any additions?
Yes, just want to add to that. The main thing is to keep yourself safe. Whether you agree or disagree with why you were stopped, what you were stopped for, how the officer is treating you, you have to live for another day. You cannot be judge and jury on the side of the road. Argument will get you nowhere. You're not going to win that one no matter what you think. You're not going to win that one. Like the chief said, subtle moves and everything, tell an officer what you're doing before you do it. And if you have friends in the vehicle and they're talking, hey, you're going to have to tell them to shut up. They're going to have to respect the officer like you're going to have to respect the officer, because if an officer is trying to watch you and your friends, that's when it's going to get ugly. Because sometimes your friends can say things to you, jibing or whatever, that'll make you say something out of the way, and it's going to end up having you locked up. Obeying the laws is a big one. When I was a state trooper, a lot of people would always, everybody is breaking the law. So we're just going to put it out there. One way or the other, sometime you're going to break the law on the highway. The thing is, just because he got you and two other vehicles past you, that's an argument not to have. Just go ahead and be respectful, take your citation, and then take the proper steps after that if you have a problem, an issue, if they got out of hand with you or anything like that.
Thank you, Sheriff Fair. Did we have any other comments? I saw you moving a little bit, D.A. Owens.
Well, I think Sheriff Fair was right on point. You know, what Representative Dortch does now, I did for a decade, and, you know, you can't have a philosophical conversation at 2 o'clock in the morning when you just left the club, because we are at a college, and I think it's appropriate to talk about the issues that college kids face. In particular, while probably everybody in this room knows somebody or has them personally partaked in the smoking of marijuana, we do know that's still against the law in this state currently. So if an officer smells something in your car, he or she is within their right and the alcohol to ask you to get out the vehicle. And that's what things seem to escalate from what I've seen. That's why I just remind people at that point in time, as Sheriff Fair said, comply, comply, comply. And don't tell somebody who your mama is, your daddy is, who you know. Nobody really cares. Law enforcement has changed from particularly when probably Chief and Sheriff started. There was a time when there was 2 officers in every car. Resources have gotten so thin that now it's only 1. They are going to a vehicle not knowing what's on the other side of that vehicle. Have no idea. They don't know what gun you have, your state of mind. So their goal is to go home safely too. I mean, for Sheriff Fair to say your goal is not to get killed, that tells you that they have a license to kill you. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's scary. I mean, I've told people, and again, I feel somewhat qualifying this because I'm in this weird way, I guess, conflicted. My sister, folks I love, don't stop in a very dark place. If you can make it to a lit place, is that close, get on the phone, call someone, let them know you're about to get stopped, let them know your location. I guess the young folks are saying you can drop your location. That stuff's very important to do for your own safety and dignity. Call someone, let them know where you are if you're worried about being harassed, the component. There are certain rules about what you can record and not record. You can't interfere with an investigation. If the police are talking to somebody, you have to be a certain distance from them. But it is also legal for you to say, I'm on Facebook Live, somebody can see this. I think that helps with the accountability factor, these type of things.
Okay. Thank you so much, D.A. Owens. So just shoot it to us straight. What are the best actions to ensure that no bad or negative confrontation takes place? And what actions should be totally avoided during an encounter with law enforcement during a traffic stop? Just give us the do's, the don'ts.
Well, first of all, you have to comply. And we cannot say that enough. And on social media, when different cases have happened across the country, you would hear people making comments, and it's very true. You would hear them making comments all the time. Well, he didn't comply. You should comply. And that is so very important, to comply with the police officer. There's not a time for attitude. There's not a time to have your case, as the sheriff said, on the side of the road. First of all, you must understand that. You also need to understand what your rights are, what your rights are, what you have the right to do, and what you have the right not to do. And most importantly, just as that officer is trying to get home that night, you should be trying to get home as well. And the way you get home is comply with what the officer has instructed you to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Do I have any further comments? Yes, we haven't heard from you, Mr. Dortch.
Thank you. I agree with everything that was said about being polite, respectful. You really have to swallow your pride. I think when we look back at this on a larger picture, though, the issue is Black and brown people come into contact with police more than anybody else. So we're experiencing these stops. We're putting ourselves at risk, as Jody has said, of being killed by police because they're in our communities more. And you can just look at the stats on marijuana, that Black and white people smoke at the same rates, but we're serving more time in jail and arrested more, because that has been, when you talk about the history of policing has always been the tool that's been pointed to our community as opposed to all the other tools. During the debate a couple of weeks ago that was just crazy, they had a 10-minute discussion about race relations in Mississippi, not in Mississippi, but in the country. And it was a 10-minute discussion on crime and law enforcement. Mm-hmm. So our country has basically looked at the needs of Black people and associated that with law enforcement, which means we get law enforcement in our community instead of social workers, mentors, all of the things that we need to actually address the root causes of these problems. So, the biggest thing that we face is steady interaction with police officers, and that chance that something's going to go wrong. And we've seen that go wrong so much over the past year.
Thank you. Thank you all. So how should a person who have not committed a crime or have not done anything wrong respond to interactions with law enforcement when questioned about suspicious activity?
Don't talk.
Know your rights.
Know your rights.
Know your rights.
Know your rights.
And of course, anytime you are approached by a law enforcement officer, I think it's a natural thing to have your adrenaline levels to go up. And so you should stay as calm as you possibly can. You know in your heart of hearts that you have not committed an offense. This will be a brief conversation if you have not done anything wrong. Again, I have to say, know your rights. Say as least as possible and always comply.
I'll love to jump in. You know, I think that, first of all, I've so appreciated this conversation, and I absolutely agree with the chief. But I also got to just add that for Black and brown people, the reality is a lot different. And not all of us are safely in spaces where we have, you know, the law enforcement folks that we have on the stage with us now. And so, you know, even when you're in a place where you have a predominantly Black police force, it does not mean that you have more safety and security as a Black or brown person. So when we say know your rights and consent, the reality is that many people exert their rights and then are still, regardless of the fact that they have done nothing, are still locked up that night. And so knowing that you have done nothing doesn't help you remain free from that night, right? And I've seen, you know, my work before returning home was predominantly working with young people who were constantly in connection with law enforcement, were constantly approached by law enforcement. Because at the time that I was in New York working, stop and frisk was a huge thing, right? It was broken windows was the formula for policing there. Over 500,000 people stopped in just 1 year, predominantly young people between the ages of 16 and 24. I had some young people that were stopped literally 4 times before they got to school every morning. And then when they got to school in the morning, had to go through security and get searched by a police officer once they got to school. The violation of Black and brown children's bodies is serious. And I don't think we really think about that and the trauma that it's doing to us mentally. When we think about New York, I say it's 500,000, but let's think about Mississippi. 60% of our prison population is Black and brown. Actually, 60% is Black. Right? And that means that an overwhelming majority of people that are being placed into contact with law enforcement are Black people, and they're not going home. And so we really got to begin to really think deeply about what we heard up here about officers are trained to respond to a threat. They're trained to think about that threat, right? And we have to really begin to think about how do we begin to increase the resources around mental health, around housing, around job security, so that we don't have to have officers that come and approach a scene immediately thinking of a threat, right? And so, you know, just wanted to add that. And I had something else to say, but I got off.
Okay, it's okay. We'll come back to you. Let me know. Okay, so second question, follow-up question from that. How should a person react when they have committed a minor misdemeanor, but is aggressively being pursued by law enforcement?
The same answer as before. I mean, what people need to understand is that if a police officer wants to arrest you or detain you, they can do that. You know, I think that the sheriff and chief said, understand your rights, understand the law. Well, if someone asks you for your driver's license, for example, concrete example, and what do you want my license for? But they have a reasonable suspicion that you might fit the bill or of someone who might have committed the crime. They have a right to ask for your driver's license. And you can choose not to give it to them. At that point in time, they can tell you to put your hands on the wall because we're going to detain you further. Now, generally, whoever that person is, once they're in handcuffs, that just escalates the situation. Your friends send you get handcuffed. I mean, to what the work in New York you saw with stop and frisk. I mean, that's traumatizing. It's horrible to see your friends get arrested. It's horrible to see them in jail. Horrible to know they're in prison. But that's their right. That's why I think everything we're talking about makes sense. But also making sure that you have leadership when you vote to understand the police in your community and how that should look, and how police have to be held accountable to the same standards. You asked a couple of questions ago what we're doing in our own work. Well, in our work, we're treating everybody the same. So if a citizen's alleged police commits a crime, and we've asked Jackson Police Department, which is the largest agency of the 13 agencies that are in this jurisdiction, to bring every police assault or homicide to us. So if an officer discharges their fire weapon and an individual's hit, we want to take that to the grand jury the same way, because transparency matters. And for people to have faith in the system, we have to have a system that works the same way for the poorest and most challenged socioeconomic person in our community, and also for the guys in blue and gals in blue. And I think that is something that you start building back this trust. Police review boards, police citizen boards. When we talk about know your rights, how do you complain on the officer? We know that we need names and badge numbers. We know if you don't get a name and badge number, what time would you wear? And how did that person look? We can go backwards and determine who was in that precinct at that time and be able to file a complaint, because it does matter to me. If I hear the same officer doing the same thing, same allegations, this officer's taking money from drug dealers or popping people inside the head or even saying something inappropriate to women while they drive, that's a pattern in practice that we try to change. Because when you have that many people, officers are still people. There will be some bad ones. The majority of them are good. I sincerely believe that. But I think in Jackson right now we have 300, 400, something like that. Somewhere, I mean, you think out of 400 people, you won't have 10 bad ones? You just be realistic with how we interact with people and our expectations, because when officers do something negative, it's so much more exemplified to the point like all officers are bad, which I don't think is fair for that labeling the same way. Because you see it the same way with people of color, right? One black person steals someone's purse, well, all the young black boys gonna steal my purse. Or somebody has dreads, all of them will do something because that's how they look with the sagging pants, which is not the truth. But again, getting off tangent here, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves how we have these conversations and how they're balances to both sides. And if we truly want to improve our communities, what role you all as students, you all as a Tougaloo family, and us as the largest community are focusing on solving these problems.
Awesome. Thank you so much to our panelists for those awesome responses. Given the tragic situation with Breonna Taylor and her home encounter, I thought it would be good for us to ask about home encounters. So how should you respond when a no-knock warrant is wrongly executed at your residence, similar to what we've seen with the Breonna Taylor case?
Yeah, I'll respond. Because these are current. Like this happens, this happens consistently. Where, sometimes officers get the wrong address. Sometimes officers, for many reasons, just go to the wrong place. And so it's really important. In Breonna Taylor's case, I don't know how that could have been prevented in terms of her part. Right. She was asleep. Right. And somebody busted into her home. Right. And so I think that, one thing, if we're talking about like what you can do as a person who gets the knock on your door, one is don't blindly just open the door, right? Ask who it is, because they don't always disclose that they're police, and that's important to know, whether they're supposed to or not. I know numerous circumstances where they haven't, and so always ask. If they then say that they're police, you have a right, folks have the right not to let them in, but to open the door, right? The other piece is to make sure that you have someone on the phone, and this is even when you're stopped by the police. Make sure you have someone on the phone so that they can hear the interaction, or make sure you have it recording, right? So that it can keep going. If there's like a neighbor close by that you can like yell out to so that somebody can at least see it, like make sure that there's just somebody that you can rely on that can also just be, in the vicinity to hear or see what is happening. I know that has saved many people's lives. And when they haven't been around, we've seen a number of people die, because of it. I mean, think back to like Eleanor Bumpers, 66-year-old woman, back in the early 1990s, who was killed in the same way. They just bust into her apartment and started shooting. And so I think, in cases like that, I don't know how that's definitely for law enforcement to answer, because, my answer to that is around how are we shifting what safety looks like. We have to shift a culture within the police department too. If we're gonna have safety, it has to be a shift. Black and brown people cannot be looked at as the most dangerous and violent people and that deserve to be treated as such. So we have to shift that culture.
Correct. Chief Williams, Sheriff Fair.
Definitely. I have to say that anytime you have a no-knock warrant, it's a dangerous situation. It's a dangerous situation for the homeowners. It's a dangerous situation for the officers that are going into that particular situation. And there's a lot of components that you have to clear before you even get that warrant to enter into that residence. And typically, no-knock warrants are drug-related type cases. And so, as I said, it's a dangerous situation for both parties. And if you find yourself in a no-knock warrant type situation, you have to understand that you have a lot of firepower coming into your home. And I have seen situations even where I live that one man who was involved in the drug culture, and he was afraid that his rivalry would come in and rob him. So he would sleep during the day and he would stay awake during the night, sit on his sofa with his weapon in his lap. And so that created a type situation. If it was a no-knock situation, yes, I am involved in the drug culture. I expect at any time that my rivalry will come, kick my door in, and I'm going to automatically fire. Well, if you have been surveilled by the police, you are a you're in the drug culture, it's not the police. It's not your rivalry that's coming in to take your drugs, take your money. It's the police that's coming in. And when that police officer hits the door, you're automatically thinking, that's not the police, that's my rivalry. And then you automatically have gunfire. So anytime you're dealing with a no-knock warrant, it's a very dangerous situation. Personally, in my department, just the other day, I had one of the investigators to come to me and he said, hey, I have been watching such and such location. I know the drugs are there and I want to go out at 5 o'clock in the morning. And my eyes got this big. Okay. So if you can go out at 5 o'clock in the morning under the cover of darkness, what's stopping you from going out during the daylight? And then the other thing that I brought to his attention, other states in this country has legalized marijuana. So how important is it to risk your life and other people's lives kicking in a door, no-knock warrant, just to get marijuana? And so there's a lot of things that are going on in these departments, and I believe the chiefs and the sheriffs need to look at these situations case by case and make decisions based on what they have before them. Now, personally, I think it's a completely different situation if you have someone that has gone by and shot up a school and killed numerous people. You got information that person is in there, then definitely enter how you must enter to resolve that situation.
Thank you.
Can I just add? I do think. Sorry, thank you. No, because I do think everything that the chief just said is really important, because it also shows us that we may need to really think about what are the rules and requirements around no-knock warrants, right? Should they exist? What does it look like if they do exist? Like, we have to have some reform around that, because even as a civilian, if anybody comes banging on my door and doesn't acknowledge that they're the police, I'm going to be ready. Right. And so so we can't expect people not to be ready and not to defend themselves. Right. And so I think that, just as much as the police are scared, as civilians who have done nothing right? When they're at the wrong house at the wrong time, which occurs. Not, and I'm not saying in Clarksdale or in Grenada, but it occurs. It occurs here in Jackson. It occurs all across the country, and it definitely here in Mississippi. How do we keep all of us safe? You know, civilians and cops.
And we have to recognize that everybody in Mississippi has multiple weapons.
That's right.
We strapped.
It's true. We need to that next.
All right, Mr. Dorch.
No, I was just going to add to that, everything, echo everything they said, but we've talked a lot about knowing your rights. This is an area where your rights kind of conflict with, existing law. Like Kentucky, just like Mississippi, is a state that has a castle doctrine. So if someone comes into your home, busts into your home, it's within your rights to shoot that person. So in the case of Breonna Taylor, her boyfriend, the charges were dropped because of the castle doctrine. And so the question is, well, did the police identify themselves? And if you're saying on this end, when it comes to Breonna Taylor, that they did, but on this end, you're letting charges go because the castle doctrine, and evidently there wasn't an identification, or it was reasonable for him to think that it wasn't the police that were coming in. There's a conflict there, and I think when we're talking about any reforms to the policy of no-knock warrants, we need to think about what laws are being passed to grant people the right to carry firearms, to use firearms, and we're doing that so much in states like Mississippi where that's putting police in harm's way, but, we're passing NRA-backed legislation in capitals like Jackson. These things conflict with each other.
And I want to add to that two things. I think the chief said that there's a lot of firepower, right? I think Breonna's boyfriend shot one time, they shot 30 rounds in that component. I hope at some point in time he identified them as police and he dropped his weapon. I think it's like the active shooter drill that we saw so often. Once you see him, I think you should get down, lay on your stomach if at all possible, and hold your hands like this and say, I don't have a weapon, or stretched out might be better. Stretched out, I don't have a weapon, to identify that. There are body cams. I wouldn't give him a reason to shoot me. I'm not going to have him see my gun on me. I'm going to drop mine if I identify him. I'm with my law school classmate that if you come in unannounced, it's on until I can determine for the safety of my kids and my well-being that we're okay, right? And I think that's why people know they have guns, they have them by their beds for that very reason. Not just dope boys, but just people who want to protect their homes, because that's your privacy and your safety. Right?
So we've mentioned our rights. Your rights, know your rights, your rights. So just briefly, if you all can just go over a few of the rights that you actually have within your own home or your private property as it relates to interactions with law enforcement.
You have the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures in your own home, which is going to be part of the Fifth Amendment. To echo everything else, your rights have limitations as well. It really does. The no-knock warrant, I don't use those. We're going to always identify ourselves, and just like the chief said, there will not be no 5 o'clock in the morning kicking the door down. That's just not going to happen. Because if you have great surveillance, you know what's going on, you know the traffic. Even if you don't get that pot of gold that you're looking for and they flush it, that's still a win for you. Nobody has lost their life. You haven't got into a gun battle and everything. They live another day, you live to go another day. You already got it under surveillance. You know what they're doing. Hey, just keep getting warrants to keep going to the same spot.
Gotcha.
If you continue to, I'm not going to use the word harass, monitor drug activity in certain places, if you show up very often, eventually they're going to move somewhere else. And then if you start showing up at those locations, they're going to move somewhere else. I do believe that you can enforce drug activity reasonably by being within the community, not just drive by the community, not just give them a look when you drive by like, oh yeah, I know what you're doing. I'm talking about getting into the community and know what's going on.
Thank you. Did anyone have anything else to add about home encounters? Okay. If not, we're going to go to the audience for questions. We have our SGA Vice President, Ms. Aurelia Kane, and our two early college high school student, Mr. Julian Beachman here as well, who will be delivering the questions from the audience and our frequently asked questions. So you may stand and come.
All right. Okay, so the first question is, what should you do when you get pulled over in somewhere that you do not feel safe, as in maybe a dark space or somewhere out in the middle of nowhere?
Okay, I'm gonna give you a twofold answer on that. It all depends on where you are. If you're in the rural county and there's no lights close by, you cannot afford to travel 5 miles before you pull over. That's gonna cause a conflict. If you don't feel safe, use the weapon that everybody has, just right here. All you have to do is call somebody, put them on the phone. To me and my officers, it doesn't bother us to be recorded, because if I'm not doing anything wrong, why should I care, right? That actually puts a lot of other officers in check when you start recording. The legality of it is you don't have to disclose to officers that you're recording them. But that's not in the same sense. You don't need to pick and prong to get them riled up while you're recording. So, but if you don't feel safe, use your phone, call somebody, slow down, turn your signal light on, and you may be able to continue for another mile or so until a safe place. But most of the time, you have to immediately pull over.
I have to say that if you find yourself in that particular situation, definitely decrease your speed until you can find a safe and a lit location. And if you're somewhere where that is miles away, I think that the other thing that you could do is call 911. Because if you call 911 and you have an open line and you're talking to the dispatcher and say, hey, I have someone behind me with blue lights on, I'm not sure if it's the police, I'm afraid to stop. That telephone call is constantly being recorded. It's constantly being recorded. So if you find yourself in that situation, you don't feel safe, first of all, you should seek and try to find a location to pull over in a lighted area. If you cannot find that particular location, I would advise you to call 911, and that is an automatic recording.
Oh, great advice. Thank you so much. That is good stuff right there. Okay, so recap really quickly. You get pulled. If you're not comfortable pulling over where you are, you can reduce your speed, call the police, call 911, inform them that you have someone in pursuit of you, you don't feel comfortable pulling over, and that should be a good solution until you find a good place to pull over.
And let me add this. So
Yes.
when you make that 911 call, the officers that are working that area, that dispatcher will know what officer that is out there. And they more than likely can reassure you that it's a valid traffic stop. This is one of our police officers.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chief Williams.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, Julian?
Good afternoon. So, good afternoon, my name is Good afternoon, my name is Julian Beacham, and good afternoon to all the esteemed panel. And I know you guys keep talking about when you're getting pulled over and keep saying you can drive to a lit area and things of that nature. So is there a specific miles, or how far is it legal for you to drive when you're being pursued by a law officer?
I don't think there's a law on the books that state how, the distance that you can drive before you're being pulled over. And so I will have to revert back to, decrease your speed. And if you can find a lit area, find that area. If not, definitely call 911.
And be careful with some of those things, though. I mean, it's no hard and fast rule, but a lot of officers have seen instances where people slow down, they throw stuff out of the car if they don't want to be seen. I'm sure you guys have come on that. That's an additional charge. It's very common for, I guess, college kids to say, I'm gonna get rid of the weed, throw the blunt out, whatever it might be. The harp on these things, I see it all the time in the file, which gives me a reason. And when they do stop you, expect a more thorough interrogation of why you didn't stop, and which might be a longer stop than you intended it to be.
All righty, we have our next question.
All right, so on what occasions do law enforcement have the right to search my vehicle?
Say you question.
So legally, they don't have the right to search unless you consent or if there's reasonable suspicion that the officer has that something illegal is going on, whether or not they smell weed in the car or they see something in plain view, like a gun or any kind of drug paraphernalia. That's the legal answer, but I know personally, my worst experience with law enforcement was a situation where a police officer asked to search our car, and we knew nothing was there, but he had already been so aggressive that, we made the decision just to let him search to get it over with, because we didn't know what was going to happen when he called somebody else to come in, because they can still detain you and call and try to have a drug dog come out and sniff the car, try to get a warrant. It's well within your rights to not consent, but sometimes it's just going to make the situation worse, which is, just being real to tell somebody that's just a situation we face right now.
What's the standard for deciding to give somebody a field sobriety test when you believe they're inebriated? What's the standard for that you have used in your career?
When you smell the intoxicating beverage, looking at a person, looking at their eyes.
Solely subjective from the officer to the person.
Absolutely, yes.
It's important to know.
And
did everybody catch that? Okay.
And I have to add that I personally believe that it should be nationally mandated that all law enforcement officers wear body cam and have a strong policy to support that body cam.
Yes.
And just as I just heard, we had a bad experience being pulled over. Law enforcement officers are aggressive, probably for no apparent reason. It's so important for all agencies to have that body cam on. And that protects the officer, and it also protects the motorist or people that are approached by law enforcement officers.
Okay, our next question.
Could you speak to the audience about probable cause and reasonable suspicion, and what are the differences between the two?
Yeah. Yes, please, I can tell you mine. Mine might be a little different.
Well, let's hear first interpretation. So from a law enforcement perspective, what would be the differences between probable cause and reasonable suspicion? And then from a legal standpoint or law standpoint, what would be those conditions for those two?
Sure.
All right, when you have probable cause, most of the time, it's more than a hunch. It's something that you've seen, you've noticed. Say, for instance, you pull someone over and they've been smoking marijuana. Hey, that's probable cause. So therefore, an officer can go further in his interaction with you. Reasonable suspicion. You had a burglary down the street, black male, 5'6", wearing dreads. And then when you get to the scene, there is 4 5'5", 5'7", 5'8" black males wearing dreads. Reasonable suspicion. So you have to interact with each one of those to try to eliminate one of those as your possible suspects.
And using the example that the sheriff gave in the purposes of a law enforcement stop, and I stay with marijuana because when you're smoking marijuana, you don't smell it the same way as if you've not been smoking, right? So you drive in your car, you're smoking, end of the day not bothering anybody, it's a very small amount, right? But you let the window down and it hits the officer. Wow, that's some good stuff. And then they end up saying, well, I got reasons for suspicion to believe that marijuana was being smoked in this vehicle. But upon further using the flashlight in the car, I see scales, I see papers, and I see a wad of cash. And I have probably cause to assume that this individual actually might be selling marijuana, which is kind of a weird thing, right? Because a lot of college kids will buy it in bulk and then share it with their friends, and they don't consider themselves to be drug dealers. They just went and got the whatever from Atlanta and just made it easier, right? We were all in college before too, we get it. But when you go to that next level, that's the difference. The probable causes also affects what you will be charged with, which is the intent to distribute, as opposed to possession and simple possession. Because here in Hinds County, I'm not going to waste my time dealing with you on some simple misdemeanor possession of marijuana. They know that. And same thing probably in Clarksdale, same thing for the sheriff too. We got serious crimes we're trying to deal with. But there is a distinction if I see something that looks like crystal meth or cocaine, right? There's certain drugs, the addictive factor of them, what you're selling, something that's dipped, is wet and all this other stuff. So the drugs is very complicated, but just look at the probable cause as the sheriff said, an additional standard that's being used is also based on case law, which will support the sufficiency of a warrant, whether the warrant was sufficient, because any criminal defense attorney is going to say, you didn't have the probable cause to go and search this person's car. But you did it, as Representative George gave you the example of, because, whatever reason they saw probably some folks in the car that made them feel uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Madam President, I should stop.
I just want you to come serve on our judiciary board.
Consider it done. It makes a difference.
Yes, ma'am.
And let me add this, if I may. We're talking about probable cause once the vehicle has been stopped. Let's talk about probable cause to stop the vehicle. Okay? In the state of Mississippi, there's a law that you must buckle up. And so
that's how you get
if you're riding and you know that you're in violation of certain laws, you have marijuana, you have drugs in your car, a probable cause to stop you. I may know you from the neighborhood. I know that he's a known drug dealer.
Right.
My probable cause to stop you, you do not have a seatbelt on.
You didn't make a left signal turn. You just make the left. It can be anything.
Exactly. And so, no seatbelt.
Speeding.
Your tags.
Speeding can go there, right?
Speeding as well. Right. Speeding as well. Any traffic violation. Speeding, do you have your seatbelt on? Is your tag current? So there's a lot of probable cause reasons to stop the vehicle before you actually get into the vehicle to deal with other probable causes.
Wow. That's good stuff.
Representative Deutsch shared with me, and we've known each other 30 years, but he shared with me his stop in Texas, the passenger didn't have a seatbelt on. Yeah. They got his car searched because the passenger didn't have a seatbelt on.
Right.
Oh, wow.
That's right.
But, the main reason we got our car searched was we were outside of Houston on I-20 with Mississippi tags. So that's why we have to love.
Now, is that reasonable suspicion?
So Sheriff Chief, is that true still that some trained law enforcement, particularly state troopers, are trained to stop out-of-state vehicles?
On I-10?
Are?
Yes.
And there's a reason why. It's the rental cars, it's all the drug trafficking corridor.
Drug trafficking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you. We are definitely getting educated today. Okay, Ms. Kane.
So regardless whether it's a traffic stop or I'm just walking down the street, when does the police or law enforcement have the right to ask for my ID?
Just quickly, law enforcement is probably going to answer this better, but going back to reasonable suspicion, when we're thinking about what was going on in New York with stop and frisk, that was under reasonable suspicion, where you could stop someone and for whatever subjective reason the officer has, pat you down, and then request your ID. So that's where that comes into play when someone's just walking down the street and the officer may want you to stop. You don't have to answer any questions, but if they have suspicion that you have a gun on you, that you've been smoking weed or some other illegal activity, they can then pat you down and ask for your ID.
And generally the basis, of my experience has been, when we're asking for an ID, we're trying to determine who you are. Are you from the community? Is there a valid warrant if I want to do a background on you? You know, that you're clear, there's no reason to detain you from that point on. Now, if people don't have an ID on them, what is protocol there if they're driving or they don't have an ID?
If they're driving,
If they're driving, well, both, because I think the question was,
Walking or driving.
I know driving, no ID. Yeah, but I'm saying if you're driving, you have to have an ID in your car. I mean, you have to.
You have to have your driver's license.
You can say, look, you can't go anywhere else. We can take, pound the car, all type of crazy stuff. But if you're walking and I don't have my ID, I left my wallet, I was playing basketball, you said, I left my wallet. That's not an offense. They can still ask for your name, and giving them the wrong name is against the law, right? That's lying to police officers, false pretenses, and that component if they choose to charge you. But they don't have to have an ID on them, right?
Well, the state of Mississippi does not require you to have a government issued identification card.
Right.
You said does not?
Does not.
Oh.
Does not.
Okay.
But to operate a vehicle, you do.
To operate a vehicle, you do.
Okay.
And a lot of times when you have people that are approached by law enforcement officers, a lot of it depends on the environment that you're in. If you are in a location that is known for a lot of criminal activity, a lot of drug activity, and if you're in that particular environment and officers are working, you have a better chance of being approached and being stopped by police. And it could be a very innocent type situation. Hey, I just happen to live in this community. I'm walking down the street. I'm minding my own business. And if the officer come to you and ask you for your ID, you may or may not have the ID. I would have to advise, if the officer asks you for an ID, you have it. You produce that ID. If not, you say that I don't have that ID. And it's very important to ask the officer, am I being detained or am I free to go?
Okay. And what about the cases that's of reverse, where it's a neighborhood that they may assume you shouldn't be in, and you may be out running or walking or doing whatever to keep your fitness together, and they approach you and they want your ID? Because I've had a friend actually in Cleveland that went through that similar situation, that he stayed in a nice neighborhood and a resident of the neighborhood, and they approached him and he refused to give his ID, and it was a situation that kind of escalated from there. And so what happens when it's a flip side, where it's not a highly criminalized environment, it's a suburban environment, and then you just are, I guess, tokenized, or you are profiled in being not a member of that community, and they ask for your ID. Do you have a right not to show it at that time, even if it is on you?
Well, I have to say that's a very true analogy, and it has happened plenty of times, and I'm sure it will continue to happen with officers thinking or believing a particular person does not belong in a particular neighborhood. I think that, first of all, if you are working that particular neighborhood, you should know your community. You should know the people in your community, the goings and comings of the people in the community. And if it's one of those situations where I just happen to be someone that does not live there, but I am going to visit a friend that's there, and if that police officer is profiling, if that police officer feel the need to harass for any reason, that's unfortunate ignorance on behalf of the law enforcement officer.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but in context here, I know that Dr. Gladney, my friend Attorney Lamont will agree with me on this, is that you have to understand that the criminal justice system was built that when you touch it, you cannot get away from it, right? That's the whole purpose of them asking for your ID, because if you have a warrant for not paying a ticket or not showing up at court, you have a bitch warrant, you won't even know it. Kids throughout Tougaloo probably have warrants and don't even know it until they get stopped or pulled over and say, oh my God, or it comes up on a background check. And that's the whole purpose of that system when it's abused, and it's like the new Jim Crow and all the stuff we know about already. So I think one of the important things that people need to be conscious of is their own responsibility when it comes to knowing that their stuff is in good order. Ricky, I'm kind of.
No, I mean, you're right on point. And you know, we had that happen even just last year when a mother, her son had pulled the fire hydrant in their apartment complex. And as a result, you know, the water starts, pouring down. He's 10-year-old, bored, just did something, right? Water starts everywhere. Police are called, they come to her house, and, you know, they ask for her information and ID and find out that she had a warrant from literally 5 years ago, right? Of some like credit card, using a credit card inappropriately, credit card fraud. So they take her to jail now and detain her. Her children are there. They have to find somebody to come and take the children. She's there for, you know, like, luckily she was there for a short period of time because she ended up, it was our first time bailing someone out through our Mississippi Bail Fund, right, collective, which is the first bail fund that we've been able to create in the state to help people who are indigent and sitting in jail get out on charges like this. So we were able, her mother luckily had been working, you know, in community, like had been coming to our community violence interruption meetings. And so her mother knew to call us. And so she called us and we immediately were like, okay, well, let's get you bailed out. Let's get your daughter bailed out. But something so simple, and then the case ended up being, you know, completely, you know, dismissed or whatever. The charges they didn't even end up indicting it, you know, once they really went through the facts of the case. I don't know if I don't think you were the DA at the time. But, you know, I just think that, you know, even that traumatic situation, because of a system, right? We got to go back to this criminal system. That this criminal system that we have here in this country and in Mississippi is so backed up at that. Like, we interact with law enforcement so much that we have so many people with tickets, so many people with fines, so many people with all of these things, that the system is so backed up that you can have a warrant for 5 years and never be indicted on anything.
Chief Williams, you said that when you started, then you said so many warrants, everybody.
That's right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And so I just think it goes back to a systemic issue that we need to really think about correcting.
Okay, and we have one final question, passenger question.
In the recent wake of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor's cases, they have sparked nationwide protests, and with this, there's even one in Mississippi. And this doesn't go specifically to the law enforcement, but the whole panel. What are the best practices to avoid negative interactions during a civil and peaceful protest?
Well, I'll just get mine out the way. No destruction of property, no destruction of people, right? Respect yourself, respect your body, respect others. Realize that there's a lot going on at those points in times. When we had the one downtown, it was highly publicized. And let me be clear, I'm a fan of protests. I think it's important. I think very little has happened in this country without protest, and we should do it from accountability purposes. And I think we're seeing the change. But what people don't know is I think there was between 50 and 100 officers on standby training in Rankin County that were authorized to come forth if things got out of hand, like we saw in some cities where, say, they start burning the Molotov cocktails. That type of stuff can get real violent really fast on both sides of intimidation. So I would say peaceful protest, fine. If you see it's, you know, peaceful turns violent pretty quickly. People wear masks and shields. I got some rocks to throw, and they're gonna throw something. I wouldn't go to those. I would walk somewhere else and do it that way.
Definitely.
So just be mindful of that.
Yeah, and I'll add, if y'all don't mind, real quick. The other thing is that when we talk about the protests, also on the side of law enforcement being prepared and understanding, like, how can we respond in a way that is not aggressive towards protesters, but actually is about keeping safety, right? And so, like, even when we talk about that, the large protest that happened here in Jackson, what we saw was that Jackson police were very much present, but they weren't present in a visible way purposefully. They were spread out and centered around the area as to not cause further intimidation, right? And to actually respond to harm because they too heard about the Rankin County folks that were ready to come, right? And so they understood, understanding what it means to actually help protect and create an atmosphere of safety as opposed to an atmosphere of aggression. Because you don't need more aggression coming from the officers that are supposed to protect you. We had the exact opposite happen in 1994, I think it was, when the Klan tried to march in Jackson, right downtown Jackson, where the police were called out to protect the Klan that was marching and were aggressive towards the anti-protesters, right? That was problematic in SWAT gears and everything, so we don't want to see that happen again. But most importantly, and anytime anybody's planning a protest, it's important to always have legal observers present. And I think Jarvis might want to talk some about that, I don't know. But to have legal observers present that are there to ensure that people, if they are arrested, that you're able to get people's contact information, immediately contact their families, and immediately contact whatever bail fund or other resources you have to help people get out. And it's also important to have your own safety and security team, right? So whether it's a protest marshal or something like that, to ensure that you're keeping crowd control, because they're always going to there's sometimes going to be people who are agitators, right? And sometimes, we've seen, when those agitators were a part of a system, right? Like we saw with COINTELPRO, specifically placed into protests to cause destruction, conflict. And so, and then sometimes it's just people who think that agitating is the best way to get a result. And they're not connected to any organization or system. And so we want to make sure that we do that. Sorry. Thank you for your...
No, you're good. If we can hear from our law enforcement officers about that particular, if they have anything to add about protest, how to avoid any negative consequences for participating in protests that are nonviolent. Just if you have anything to add.
Well, definitely, I must add that even in Clarksdale, at the height of the George Floyd incident, we had people that were in Clarksdale protesting. And I have to give all of the credit to my mayor, who was very instrumental in helping them organize the protest. And he made sure that police officers were there, and as you stated, to stand back, not so much to approach in a negative way. Our concern was the outside agitators that we had gotten word from that could possibly come in and disrupt the peaceful protest. And so I think that is important when a protest is, when you have plans for a protest, you certainly should reach out to your city government and to law enforcement.
Sounds good. Thank you for those responses. And we have one final question. If we can just have one of the two law enforcement officers, please, to answer this question. What are my rights as a passenger in a traffic stop? Meaning, am I legally obligated to show an ID if asked? Do I have rights as a passenger? So can either of you or both very briefly just tell the rights of the passenger?
Well, I would say really quick, as a passenger in the vehicle, you're not responsible for the conduct of the driver of the vehicle. And if you are legal, if you're not in violation of anything, you are free to walk away. If there is some type of reasonable suspicion where the passenger is concerned, then that's a different situation. But basically, the passenger is not responsible for the conduct of the driver of the vehicle.
But if asked about an ID, do they have to present an ID?
Yeah.
Definitely present.
Okay. Okay. I just want to be clear.
I think on a more serious note, if there's a weapon in the car and nobody knows who weapon it is, they both could be charged with it. If there's a large amount of drugs in the car, they also both could be charged with it. If there's a felon in Mississippi and throughout the country, felons are not allowed to have firearms. And oftentimes people still have firearms in their car because they need to protect themselves and their community. But if someone says, I don't know who gun it is, everybody can be charged. So I would be concerned about who I'm traveling with. If the drugs in the car, they might as well just be your drugs if it's a lie. You think they're going to take the fall for you, but that's not how it works out.
And even if they do say they'll take the fall for you, it's up to the charging, it's up to the prosecutor and the officer to decide whether you're going to be charged, regardless of who says it was theirs or wasn't theirs. So just everybody we all get it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fair, did you have anything to add?
Well, he summed it up for me.
Okay, sounds good. So that has concluded the frequently asked / questions from the audience. We have just 2 final questions, and we've talked a little bit about protests, and we had Attorney Lumumba actually mentioned some information related to the defunding of police earlier, and she gave more insight about what that really means, because there's a lot of misconceptions about defunding the police. So in that same breath of ideas, what social advocacy options are available outside of just protests? We definitely see that it's a lot of just action takes place around protesting, but as we know, policy is huge. As we know, elected officials and their ability to speak towards the issues of the people are huge. So if each of you all could, just share any of those alternative actions for change that our students, specifically our students, can participate in addressing some of these social justice issues. So one, just kind of give us some ideas or suggestions and strategies as it relates to doing things outside of just protest. And then what some of the specific actions college students can take. As I've always said, since I've been in higher education, the student has the loudest voice. And so how can we capitalize and mobilize that voice in a way that it really is creating meaningful and sustainable change? So if you all can each of you all, if we can just have 2 minutes for each person. When my little finger goes up, that means you have 1. Thanks.
Well, I get involved with a lot of the college campuses, friends that I know that have kids that's in college. And my thing to them is social media is very powerful. It's so powerful that it can change the dynamics of any situation. Protests are powerful as well. But I always ask them the question, what do you do next? If you're gonna protest, if you're gonna do the social media, if you're gonna complain, why don't you do the thing that's gonna make the change for everybody? Get out and vote. And encourage your peers to get out and vote. That's gonna be the dynamics that's gonna solve not all of the problems, but it will get us going in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sheriff Fair.
I believe that, first of all, it's important to be aware and have knowledge of what's going on in your community at all times, or as much as you possibly can. Also, it's very important to educate yourself, be educated, be able to participate, be able to make a difference in your community. And I believe that you should work on your own habits and your own beliefs.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Williams.
I was just going to mention that voting is very important, and voting in these local elections are very important because we do need more sheriffs and we need mayors that are going to appoint chiefs that are open to listening to these issues. When we're trying to make change at the Capitol, when I was in the House, and this is going to be going forward next year as well, one of the things that's preventing us from changing laws or passing laws like body cam policy is local law enforcement, sheriffs and DAs that go to the Capitol and basically stop us from passing anything progressive. The problem is we don't have a lot of Jody Owens in the 18 DAs offices that we have throughout the state. We don't have sheriffs in every place in throughout the state that are vocal and advocate for change. So there are Republican and Democratic legislators that want to change some of these policies and address these things, but they're afraid, definitely afraid, of getting cross with their sheriff or their district attorney. And the governor, as he did this year in vetoing the criminal justice bill that we did pass, he just basically took that from the DAs and sheriffs that, they didn't want it. They don't want to change it. DAs want the ability to charge people with high crimes and put years over them so they'll plead out. So that, these local elections are very important because they dictate a lot, not just what's going on in your community, but statewide.
Thank you, Mr. Dort.
Yeah, I think I would say consistency with showing up and showing out. I think the problem we have is that, when it's attractive to be at the protest, everybody comes to it. There's been several protests this year. Sister Rakia had one out there in the cold, right when the governor did something that she knew was not for the people. Everybody had COVID masks on, and it didn't get all that coverage, but it was equally as important. And whether through fraternities and sororities, your civic clubs, be consistent in movement building, because all that we do when we want equity and parity under the law is about consistency. The flag changed this year, but people have been fighting the flag for 100 years. It's been at least 10 different lawsuits you hadn't even heard of, and back and back and back. And so many people don't make it to see this, but they plant the seeds. And we have to be willing to plant seeds outside of protests. I mean, Representative Dortch right. I'm sure in his old capacity, he knows this week they've been having budget hearings. Well, they've been having budget hearings this week for corrections and Medicare and all these things, and you go in their room and it's nobody in there. And that's when they determine where the money's gonna go. And of course, they're like Mississippi. I mean, we have to be learned about this process. And I think one of the things I would encourage Dr. Gladney as I close is that to make sure we're putting the information out to our people. How can I be active and where? Because people don't look for it anymore. We have to give it to them. And in the spirit of this organization and Reuben Anderson, I mean, we're still talking about seeing first in Mississippi, right? And there's so many other firsts we're trying to make. Right now, there's a sister, Latrice Westbrook, who's trying to be the first person of color as a female in Mississippi Supreme Court. Do people know that? And when are we going to say we don't have to have first anymore? And that's what we got to challenge our energy to keep moving forward.
Thank you, DA Owens. And to close us off, our lovely attorney and alumni, Attorney Lumumba.
So I just echo everything that I've heard. And for some direct actions that people can take now, one is go to breatheact.org and learn about that act. It's a federal legislation that we're also able to make local, so our local jurisdictions that really challenge our systems of accountability and public safety. So looking at ways where we reverse the opportunities to keep communities safe without allowing police brutality to go unchecked, right? So go to breatheact.org, sign up for that, and learn how you can implement it in your local town or cities. It really goes to a lot of what we heard spoken here today around how we can really change system. The other piece, vote, but also engage beyond that. Many of us can't vote. When you have 200,000 Mississippians around that who have been incarcerated and now cannot vote ever again in their lives, we need all of us to vote, right? And most of them are Black and brown and poor, right? We got to really just think about that. So vote, but also be engaged. One way to get engaged in the electoral process all year round is through the People's Assembly, the Jackson People's Assembly. Through the Jackson People's Assembly last year, we had our own participatory budgeting process with the city of Jackson, where we actually had influence in the budget of the city. And through that process, we saw that when residents said that they wanted some investment in community alternatives to safety, that the city invested some of the police dollars removed it and put it into community investment a little bit. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and have been working to build a violence interruption and credible messenger program where community members are now going to be taking ownership of keeping communities safe so that police don't have to come in after a crime has been done, right? Super important. And then the other piece is, if you're looking at other ways of where we can dream big and dream beyond what we see in our state and what we see with our own eyes, You can go to Black National Convention. We just had a Black National Convention virtually in August of this year, the Movement for Black Lives. And what we did is that we pulled together all of the beauty and resources and policy changes and actions in community, all of the transformation that we're seeing happening across the nation in Black communities, and pulled it together into a very well put together mini documentary, basically, that I think you all will enjoy, and we've only gotten really great feedback around it. At this point, 4 million people have watched it across the nation. You should check it out. BNC, Black National Convention. Watch it because it gives concrete reason, and it highlights Mississippi. And it highlights Mississippi for consistently being the state where Black people have always, we started this voting rights movement. I'm sorry. We started this voting rights movement. Fannie Lou Hamer. You know, if you want something to do, the Poor People's Campaign, let me tell you, we always out there protesting. I get so tired of getting a call saying, okay, we got to get out there today. I'm like, and so we always got to be out, but it's that action, it's that movement that's happening. So, you know, look for Mississippi Poor People's Campaign on Facebook because we're out there. We want to do something around prison reform, Mississippi Prison Reform Coalition, also on Facebook. When we showed up over and over and over again to hearings, and Representative Deutsch will tell you, when we showed up to hearing, it makes a difference. They began to listen. They began to see. We saw movement even with the Criminal Justice and Oversight Corrections Committee task force, where they began to add recommendations based on our presence and recommendations as community members in that space. So we can make change if we are present. And then the last thing is check out the Vision for Black Lives at movementforblacklives.org, at M4, the letter number 4, BL.org. The Vision for Black Lives is a document that really highlights all of the various issues that impact our lives as Black people and give us more ideas and opportunities to think about how we can change systems and how we've seen change happen and win across the nation. So those are just some resources that I offer.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all so much. We have learned a lot in this session. The goal of this session was for us to become educated. So often we hear of the tragedies with encounters with the police, and what can we do but to ask law enforcement and those who work every day with law enforcement to help us, to educate us, to teach us the way to save ourselves, to survive. And so, you know, this has been a beautiful moment to have a DA, to have the executive director of ACLU, we have a sheriff, we have the chief of police, and we have an amazing transformative justice activist and attorney on one panel standing in solidarity saying, hey, we're going to educate you on what to do with encounters with police. And so I feel like our goal has definitely been met. The objective have been reached. And so I want to personally thank you on behalf of not only myself, but Tougaloo College and the Student Government Association and Institute for Social Justice. We are so appreciative for you being a part of our inaugural program coming out of the center. We look to do even more amazing work. And so now I will hand the floor over to our amazing president, President Carmen Walters.
Well, let's give this panel a round of applause. Thank you all so much for all the information and the knowledge. Yesterday, we had a very similar panel, and it was on health disparities for African Americans here in the state of Mississippi and the region. And tonight, this afternoon, to have you all here to talk to us about the right to live. It's disappointing that we have to have sessions like this in 2020, but we absolutely have to. And that is the reason Tougaloo College started the Social Justice Justice Institute with the partnership for Justice Reuben V. Anderson to give us the dollars to do that. This topic is so important to us. You all know that social justice and social responsibility is the red thread that runs through Tougaloo. And so we wanted to make sure that not only our actions, movement reflects that, but we wanted our curriculum to continue to reflect that. And so in this center, we will have our pre-law program housed, but we will also have our public policy program housed and leadership development. And the purpose behind all of this is so that we can grow more like you, more people like you, taking these roles in our community and changing what we do and why we do it and how we do it. And so this was amazing for us to have, and it's the first of many. We're going to continue to do these, and I know Attorney Miller is here. He's leading this initiative. We are so sold out on this. We just received a $500,000 grant from the Mellon Foundation for our center, and then we received another $300,000 grant from USDA for our leadership component. We are partnered with Attorney General Eric Holder, who's helping us to raise $250,000 for students who want to major in public policy. So we are putting our money where our mouth is on this. We are sold out, we're committed, and we're going to make sure that Tougaloo is in the midst of the community, educating our students. I want us to do the way we used to do in the 60s. My brothers would come home with little pamphlets, and they told them what to do when the police stopped them. And we stopped doing that. People need to, we need to develop those again, because it's about educating our citizens. When we talk about they have to know their rights, sometimes the way the rights are written, only the lawyer can know the right. For example, I was pulled over, and I didn't know that just signing the ticket didn't mean I was guilty. I found that out when I went to court. You know, I said, well, I'm gonna sign it, you know, but I know I didn't do what you said, yada, yada. And so when I got to court, that's when the judge told me, he said, well, just signing the ticket doesn't mean you're guilty, you know, and I could have gotten into a big altercation for not wanting to sign the ticket. And here I am, a person leading a college and don't know my rights. And so we all have to be accountable for teaching each other and being engaged. And so I wanna know from you guys, what can Tougaloo do to help our students have success? How can we educate them? It's very difficult to tell a student who's come here from Colorado, where it's legal to smoke marijuana, but now you're here on my campus and you can't smoke marijuana. So I need to be educated about how we do this thing across the country and how we keep our students safe when they leave our safe haven here at Tougaloo. So this was important to us. So I want to thank you guys for taking the time to do this. Tougaloo we don't have any money, so we can't pay you, but we can certainly thank you. And so speaking of money, I want to talk to you about giving to Tougaloo, because this kind of programming is huge. It's so big for us to be able to put this on the airways and let those who are sitting at home look at this on YouTube, and then to host this on our YouTube site. We want to do more programming of this type, but we need your support. So we'd like you to go to our website, www.tougaloo.edu, and there's a tab there that says Give. Now, the interesting thing about Tougaloo is $1 makes a big difference. You can give $1, you can give $1 million, you can give $4 million. But if you don't want to give cash, we have something there called a wish list. We're going into the holidays. So you can look at the wish list and say, well, I want to give paint. I want to give tile. You know, it's very practical. And so we want to make it easy for everyone to give toward educating our students. You saw Aman, he's our SGA president. We don't have to tell our students about protests. They know how to do that. They protested me this year. So they know how to do that well. I'm so proud of them. They take things into their own hands. And Tougaloo students, you know this, have always done that. And so we want to continue to support what they're doing. We have our wonderful high school on campus.
Our freshman students are scoring 21 on the ACT, and they're not a senior yet. So these are opportunities that you can invest in. We have so many things happening. Go to our website, look at where you fit in. Every dollar matters. And so please give this week. This is a banner week for us. We're really going to be announcing some huge gifts the rest of the week. We want your name to be on the list. So thank you for being here. We have a presidential lecture that starts at 6 o'clock. And then tomorrow we have more events. Our coronation happens. We have a big day Sunday. Look at our website. Enjoy what we're doing. Give us your support physically, financially, and spiritually. Thank you all so much. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much to everyone who tuned in via live stream on YouTube. Thank you for all of our guests that were able to make it in person with effective social distancing and mask wearing. Thank you, Dr. West, for your constant reinforcement of that. We appreciate you. And most of all, thank you to our panelists. Once again, we appreciate the knowledge that you shared, the expertise that you shared, and we will be calling again you individually for more work and more support for the things that we're trying to do with the Institute. So thank you, and we hope that each of you have great and safe destinations home.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, if you haven't,